Well, with more on his numbers, we're now joined by David Coletto, the founder and the CEO of Abacus Data. David, good to see you.
Lovely to see you, Michael.
Listen, I want to begin with your top line numbers here, because currently you have Liberals at 40%, Conservatives at 37%, the NDP 11%, the Bloc Québécois at 7%. The margin of error, I believe, is what, 2.3%? So does that mean that the Liberals and Conservatives are essentially in a statistical tie?
Well, that's one way to see it. An alternative version is the Liberals are ahead by a wider margin, right? So that margin of error extends both ways. But yeah, I think there, you can argue that depending on turnout, depending on a whole bunch of factors, that this race could be closer than what the polls suggest. But there's just as likely a scenario where it's the alternative, where the Liberals are actually farther ahead. So more likely outcome is it's about a 3-point lead right now.
A 3-point lead, as you say, and you also were writing about today saying that this is not over yet, although there seems to be a bigger spread when you talk about those who are certain to vote. We have a board here for people at home. Can you walk us through those numbers?
Yeah, so because about a quarter of eligible voters have already voted, when you take them and you ask them how they voted, and then you take those who say, I am certainly going to vote next Monday, the Liberals actually open up a slightly larger lead. They're ahead by 5 points. We have them 42% for the Liberals and 37% for the Conservatives, which suggests that two things. One is the Liberals probably did a little bit better over the weekend in terms of advanced polls. And among those remaining who say they're going to still vote, the Liberals also have slightly more motivated base. So that's been one of the interesting features of this election, is that we typically in past elections have seen Conservatives being the most motivated. They often overperform their polls, but in this case, the evidence that I'm seeing in our polling suggests that they're about equal, but the Liberals actually might have a slight turnout advantage. I think in part because they're doing quite well among older voters who we know are more likely to vote in most elections.
Yeah, more likely to vote, as you say. But, regionally, I'm wondering what you're seeing there, because it's been interesting to watch how close or not close the parties have been in key regions like Quebec, Ontario, British Columbia. What story are they telling you right now?
So we see a similar story we've seen for the last few weeks, but in British Columbia, we've got the Liberals now clearly in the lead. I think that suggests why Mark Carney is out there today on offense, trying to pick up some seats on Vancouver Island and other parts of the province. We've got the Liberals slightly ahead in Ontario. They're ahead by 5 among all committed voters, up by 8 among that most certain group that we talked about earlier. But I think an interesting story might be emerging in Quebec, where we have the Liberals now just ahead by 3 over the Bloc. The Conservatives are at 26, the Bloc at 30, the Liberals at 33, which is a tightening there. Now, I'm not ready to call it and say this is a much tighter race in Quebec. Sample sizes are smaller, but there's other indicators from other pollsters that maybe something might be happening in Quebec, and I think Quebec is kind of a critical place for the Liberals if they're going to want to win a majority out of all of this, because of how many more seats seem to be in play there than would have otherwise been in normal circumstances.
Yeah, interesting, as you say, because it could determine majority. It also could determine if, for example, the Bloc Québécois get enough seats. Do they actually hold the balance of power in the next parliament? So it's an interesting picture that we're watching emerge in Quebec in these last few days. Where do leader impressions fit into this final stretch, David?
Well, really interestingly, it's likely that Mark Carney is going to end this campaign as the only leader with a net favorable impression. So more people have a positive view of him than a negative one. And despite a little bump last week, we still see that, his favorables are really good. He's got a plus 13, which you have to go back to when Justin Trudeau won in 2015 to find another leader that had that kind of goodwill. And that's a big part of the Liberal success, is that they have the most popular leader. His numbers have not really changed all that much. In fact, they've slightly improved over the course of the campaign, and that's giving them strength. Now, on the flip side, Mr. Poilievre, is not deeply disliked. His negatives are up slightly from before the debates and the long weekend, but he still finds about 4 in 10 Canadians who say they have a positive view of Mr. Poilievre. So you really have a unique feature of this campaign, is that both of the main leaders, those running to be prime minister for the most part, are genuinely well liked by the people who are going to vote for them. And I think that's a reason why that Conservative vote has been pretty resistant to change. It hasn't gone up much beyond 40, but it hasn't dropped far either. And I think it's in part because while not all Canadians like Mr. Poilievre, those that are going to vote Conservative really do.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this is in different times where the Conservatives currently sit, and with the popularity of Poilievre where it is, that would arguably be enough to actually get Conservatives a majority government, but these are not regular times, as we've been noting. So when you walk through this, you talk about a positive impression for Carney, slightly more motivated Liberal voters than any other political party voters, a slight lead when you look at the actual top line numbers. So what does that say to you about these final days of the campaign? Is there still room for massive movement, or is the advantage still with the Liberals at this point, David?
I think the window is closing pretty quickly. I mean, we've asked voters, have you made up your mind, or are you still open to changing it? And about 1 in 4 Canadians overall say they're still open-minded, but I also wonder how many of them are actually going to vote. So we know that about 1 in 4 eligible voters already cast a ballot, so their support, wherever it went, is locked in. And that leaves a much smaller group of likely voters who are still out there. And I don't yet see any evidence that the things that have to change for the Conservatives to be in a position to win this are changing, and they're running out of time. And so unless we see a spike in those who want to change in government, unless we see Mark Carney's favorables drop rapidly over the next few days, I'm still pretty confident that that the Liberals are the favorites to win this election, unless those things materialize as I talked about.
Mm-hmm. So the big question almost is whether it's going to be a Liberal minority or majority at this point.
Feels that way, yeah, it does, and I think we're close to the edge on how likely either of those outcomes are, but that will be where the ground game really comes in. Is the Liberal game strong? Are they going to be able to pull their votes? Same for the Conservatives, and can the NDP maybe surprise us by doing what Jagmeet Singh has said all along, is that despite very low numbers nationally, can those incumbent NDP MPs hold on? These are all the questions we're going to watch on Monday night, because I think the polls aren't going to give us much insight into those things.
Okay, David, always appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
My pleasure, Michael. Thank you.